There is a liquid resource that defies the very economic model of the modern garden center. It does not require you to drive to a big box store and load heavy plastic sacks of blue crystals into your trunk. It does not ask you to swipe your credit card to pay for the byproducts of the petrochemical industry. It is a fertilizer that is produced locally, hyper-locally, within the walls of your own home, every single day, regardless of the stock market, regardless of shipping lanes, and regardless of inflation. It is the most potent source of organic nitrogen available to the amateur gardener, a substance that drove the agricultural engines of civilizations for 4,000 years before being rebranded as waste. It turns yellow corn green in a week. It revitalizes compost piles that have gone cold and dormant. It is the only fertilizer that is completely free, infinite in supply, and perfectly chemically balanced to trigger explosive vegetative growth. And yet, in the last century, a multi-billion-dollar sanitation and chemical industry has convinced you to flush it away with fresh drinking water. It wasn't erased from our collective knowledge because it is toxic. In its raw state, it is generally sterile. It wasn't erased because it is ineffective. It is actually more bioavailable than the synthetic pellets you buy for $20 a bag. It was erased because of a cultural shift towards sterilization and a corporate desire to commoditize the very building blocks of life. This is the substance that the ancients called liquid gold. It is the taboo secret of the prize-winning giant pumpkin growers and the Depression-era survivalists. This is the story of human urine, the infinite nitrogen source that offers you total independence from the global fertilizer shortage. Why have they convinced you that your own biology is a hazardous material? Welcome to the true definition of a closed-loop system. If you want to understand the alchemy that turns a biological byproduct into food security, subscribe and activate the bell. You are about to learn how to break the cycle of consumption. I remember watching my great-uncle tend to his lemon trees in the backyard of his small, dusty property during a particularly dry summer in the late 70s. While the neighbors were dragging hoses and spreading expensive chemical feeds that burned the soil, his trees were heavy with fruit, the leaves a deep, waxy, dark green that looked almost artificial. I asked him once what his secret was. He didn't take me to a shed full of commercial products. He pointed to an old watering can near the back door and winked. "The trees drink what we don't need," he said. He was practicing a method of fertilization that dates back to ancient Babylon, a method that sustained the intense agriculture of China and Japan for millennia before the West forced them to adopt chemical salts. He wasn't just gardening. He was participating in the nitrogen cycle. He explained that, while the world was panicking about the price of oil, which dictates the price of fertilizer, he had a factory right inside his body. He told me that flushing this resource away was an act of insanity, a theft from the soil that fed him. When I asked why everyone didn't do it, he looked at me with that same seriousness my grandfather had. "Because they've been trained to be squeamish," he said. "They'd rather pay for a factory-made imitation than use the real thing because they are afraid of nature." To understand why this liquid gold is the ultimate inflation-proof asset, we have to look at the chemistry that the fertilizer companies try to replicate. The primary nutrient every plant needs to grow stems and leaves is nitrogen. It is the engine of photosynthesis, the core component of chlorophyll. Without it, your garden is yellow, stunted, and weak. In the modern world, we get nitrogen from the Haber-Bosch process, an industrial method that uses immense amounts of natural gas to pull nitrogen from the air and turn it into synthetic ammonia. It is an energy-intensive, planet-warming, expensive process. But the human body is a biological Haber-Bosch machine. When you eat protein, your body breaks it down into amino acids. What it doesn't use, it filters through the kidneys and expels as urea. Urea is a nitrogen bomb. It is approximately 46% nitrogen, along with significant amounts of dissolved phosphorus and potassium, the holy trinity of NPK. A single adult produces enough of this resource in 1 year to fertilize nearly 10,000 square feet of intensive vegetable garden. Consider the biology of what happens when you pour this onto the soil. Unlike synthetic blue crystals, which are salts that can kill the microscopic life in the soil, the bacteria, the fungi, the worms, organic urea acts as a dinner bell for the soil food web. When applied correctly, soil bacteria immediately latch onto the urea and use an enzyme called urease to convert it into ammonium and then into nitrates that plants can drink up like a smoothie. You are not just feeding the plant, you are feeding the soil ecosystem. This is why the corn grows taller. This is why the tomatoes set more fruit. You are pouring liquid energy into the ground. Let's project the economics of this over a decade. A bag of high-quality organic blood meal or feather meal allows you to add nitrogen to your soil, but it costs $30 to $50 and lasts maybe a season. Over 20 years, a serious gardener might spend thousands of dollars just replacing the nitrogen that their vegetables suck out of the ground. The user of liquid gold spends zero. In fact, they save money on their water bill by flushing the toilet less often. The economic model of the fertilizer industry relies on you breaking the cycle. You buy food, nutrients, you eat food, you flush the nutrients, and then you buy fertilizer to grow more food. It is a linear line of consumption designed to drain your wallet. The liquid gold gardener operates in a circle. The nutrients from the garden go into the body, and the excess nutrients from the body go back into the garden. It is a perfect zero-waste economy. So, why is it taboo? Why do we recoil at the idea of using this resource? It wasn't always this way. In Victorian England, before the advent of the modern sewer system, night soil men would collect waste to be sold to farmers. The leather tanners used it to cure hides. The gunpowder manufacturers used it to make saltpeter for the wars of empire. It was a strategic commodity. The Roman Emperor Vespasian even famously placed a tax on the collection of urine from public latrines. When his son complained about the disgusting nature of the revenue source, Vespasian held up a gold coin and said, "Pecunia non olet." Money does not stink. The shift happened with the rise of the sanitary movement in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. As cities grew denser and cholera outbreaks became common, human waste was lumped into one category: dangerous filth. The nuance was lost. While solid waste carries pathogens and parasites, urine from a healthy person is generally aseptic when it leaves the body. But the industrial solution was to mix it all together and flush it into the rivers or treatment plants. We engineered a system that treats a valuable resource as a toxic liability. Furthermore, the sterility of the modern garden changed the mindset. The post-war suburbanite wanted a garden that looked like a living room. Clean, orderly, and smelling of chemicals, not biology. The fertilizer companies sold convenience in a bag. They sold the idea that science had surpassed nature. They disconnected the act of eating from the act of growing. Just as the nursery industry prefers you to buy annuals every year rather than planting perennials, the chemical industry prefers you to be dependent on their supply chain for fertility. If you realized you could grow the biggest onions in the county using what you flush down the drain, their stock prices would plummet. We are currently facing a fertilizer crisis that the news cycle rarely covers in depth. The global supply of phosphorus is finite and shrinking. The cost of natural gas, needed to make synthetic nitrogen, is volatile. We are seeing farmers riot in Europe and supply chains buckle in Asia. In this context, relying on imported sacks of fertilizer is a strategic weakness. Utilizing liquid gold is a survival maneuver. It is an act of resilience. When you utilize this resource, you are telling the system, I do not need your factories to make my garden grow. You are reclaiming your role as a producer, not just a consumer. However, there is a catch. There is a reason many people try this in a moment of desperation and fail, burning their plants and creating a foul odor. They treat it like water. They pour it directly onto the delicate roots of a seedling, undiluted, and the sheer potency of the nitrogen and the salts chemically burns the plant tissue. Or they splash it on the leaves, inviting rot. This is where the knowledge gap lies. The golden ratio of dilution and the discipline of aging are the secrets that separate the foolish amateur from the master horticulturist. Most modern organic gardening books will barely touch this subject, or they will bury it in a footnote about compost activators. They are afraid of offending the reader. I am not here to coddle you. I am here to give you the tools of abundance. You cannot just apply this haphazardly. You must manage it. And that management requires a specific understanding of chemistry and timing. If you want to access the infinite nitrogen of this lost method, you must ignore the squeamishness of modern culture and return to the biology of the earth. The method used by the wise farmers of the pre-industrial age is precise. It is not merely dumping waste, it is administering a powerful biological stimulant. The mistake most novices make is treating liquid gold as a gentle tonic. It is not. It is rocket fuel. If you pour raw urine directly onto the root zone of a tomato plant, the high concentration of mineral salts and the sudden spike in ammonia will draw water out of the plant's roots through osmosis, causing fertilizer burn. The plant will turn brown, crisp up, and die. To secure a legacy harvest, you must understand the art of dilution. This is the trench method of the liquid fertilizer world. You begin with a golden ratio. For standard garden vegetables, your corn, your squash, your brassicas, the safe, effective dilution rate is 1 part urine to 10 parts water. 1 to 10. This transforms the caustic raw material into a gentle, nutrient-rich tea that the soil can absorb immediately. This ratio mimics the natural nitrogen levels found in the richest alluvial soils. For tender plants, seedlings, or potted plants that cannot drain easily, you must be even more conservative. 1 part urine to 20 parts water. 120. This scares off the impatient gardener who wants to just dump and go. Good. This method is for the diligent. But simply diluting it is only the first step. You must understand how to apply it. You never ever apply this directly to the foliage or the fruit. You are not foliar feeding, you are feeding the soil. You pour this solution onto the earth around the base of the plant, ensuring it soaks deep into the root zone where the bacteria are waiting. The best time to do this is early in the morning, when the soil is cool and the sun won't evaporate the ammonia before it can be fixed by the soil microbes. There is a deeper level of mastery here, one that involves the concept of aging. Fresh urine is rich in urea, but if you store urine in a sealed container for a few weeks, a process called hydrolysis occurs. The urea decomposes into ammonia and carbon dioxide. This aged urine is even more potent, but it is also more alkaline and has a stronger odor. In the past, this aged substance was prized for cleaning textiles because of that ammonia content. For the gardener, however, fresh is usually best for immediate nitrogen delivery. If you do save it, you must cap it tight to prevent the nitrogen from gassing off into the air. Now, let's address the salt issue, the second point of failure for the uninitiated. Our modern diets are high in sodium. That sodium passes through us. While nitrogen is good for plants, excess sodium is a killer. It destroys soil structure and blocks water uptake. If you use liquid gold aggressively year after year without a strategy, you risk salinating your soil. The solution is simple, but requires discipline. You must rely on organic matter. Carbon. You need to ensure your soil is rich in compost, decaying leaves, and carbon material. The humus in the soil acts as a buffer, binding up the salts and protecting the plant roots. Furthermore, in areas with heavy rainfall, the salts are naturally washed away. If you live in an arid climate, you must alternate your liquid gold feedings with deep flushings of pure water to push the salts down below the root zone. Let's look at the specific application for the hunger gap crops. In the early spring, when the ground is cold and the microbes are sleepy, organic granular fertilizers take weeks to break down. They are useless to a shivering spinach plant. But liquid gold, because it is already in solution, is instantly available. It is the perfect starter fluid to wake up your winter garden. Garlic, onions, and leeks, the heavy feeders, absolutely adore this stuff. A weekly dose of the 1:10 ratio on a patch of garlic will produce bulbs twice the size of those left to fend for themselves. However, the most potent use of this resource is not even on the plants directly. It is on the compost pile. This is the carbon-nitrogen balance accelerator. We've all had a compost pile that just sits there. It's full of dry leaves, straw, and dead stalks, all carbon. It lacks the nitrogen to heat up. You could buy a box of commercial compost starter, which is just overpriced nitrogen, or you can pour your daily collection onto the pile. The effect is miraculous. The nitrogen triggers a bacterial explosion. The pile heats up, steaming within 24 hours, breaking down the tough carbon material into black, rich humus in half the time. This is the pea-sickling method that turns waste into black gold. Why did this knowledge disappear from the suburban yard? It wasn't an accident. It was a shift in culture driven by the yuck factor and the commodification of hygiene. In the 1950s, the push was for a sterile existence. The bathroom was a place of shame and chemicals, separated strictly from the kitchen and garden. To suggest carrying a bucket from one to the other was seen as backwards, primitive, unrefined. The fertilizer industry capitalized on this. They sold you the clean alternative. Why handle a biological fluid when you can sprinkle odorless blue dust? Furthermore, the real estate of the mind changed. We began to view ourselves as separate from nature, not part of it. We became observers of the garden, not participants in its cycle. Using your own output to feed your intake requires a mental shift. It requires accepting that you are an animal, a biological entity involved in the transfer of energy. It doesn't fit the sanitized, plastic-wrapped version of modern life. It requires a mindset of integration. But the silence around this fertilizer is suspicious for another reason. The results are undeniable. A study by the Stockholm Environment Institute found that urine-fertilized crops produced yields equal to or better than those grown with synthetic fertilizers. When the industrial system realized they couldn't patent the human bladder, they simply ignored it. They lobbied for regulations that made it difficult to use biological waste in commercial farming, and those taboos trickled down to the backyard gardener. We are currently facing a fragility in our food systems that we haven't seen since the 1930s. Inflation is eating away at savings. Supply chains are stuttering. The cost of commercial farming inputs is skyrocketing, which drives up the cost of groceries. In this context, buying fertilizer is a dependency. Generating your own is a strategic maneuver. It is an act of rebellion. When you utilize liquid gold, you are telling the system, I possess the means of production within my own body. You are breaking the cycle of dependency. There is a valid concern about pharmaceuticals. People ask, what if I take medication? Will it end up in my tomatoes? It is a fair question. The soil is a powerful filter. Bacteria break down most complex pharmaceutical molecules over time. However, to be the safest survivalist, the rule is simple. If you are on heavy antibiotics or chemotherapy, flush it. Do not use it. But for the average person taking a blood pressure pill or a daily vitamin, the soil web degrades these compounds long before they can be taken up by plant roots, especially if you use the compost pile method rather than direct application. The composting process reaches temperatures that sterilize and break down almost all contaminants. So here is your roadmap. You don't need to replumb your house. You don't need a septic tank permit. You need a simple collection vessel, a wide-mouthed jug or a dedicated bucket with a tight lid. You need a watering can, and you need the privacy of your own backyard. Start with the compost pile. It is the gateway drug to this practice. Pour your collection onto the leaves and straw. Watch the steam rise. Watch the pile shrink. Realize the power you have been wasting. Then move to the heavy feeders, the corn, the tomatoes, the squash. Apply the 1:10 ratio once a week during the vegetative growth stage. Stop when the plants begin to ripen their fruit, just to ensure all the nitrogen is used up and the plant focuses on seed production. Commit to the mental shift. It seems strange, I know. But consider the alternative. Do you want to be dependent on a global supply chain that ships rocks halfway around the world to be processed with natural gas to grow a tomato? Or do you want to close the loop? Every person who adopts this taboo fertilizer is removing a brick from the wall of the industrial agricultural complex. Every gallon you divert from the sewage system is a gallon of fresh water saved and a pound of vegetables gained. It is a legacy of wisdom you leave for yourself, a return to the logic of the grandfather who knew that nothing in nature is waste. Everything is just a resource in the wrong place. Imagine the satisfaction of harvesting a pumpkin the size of a beer keg, or corn that towers over your head, and knowing it cost you absolutely nothing. That is true wealth. That is true security. And that is why they politely discourage you from talking about it at the garden club. The system thrives on your neediness. The garden thrives on your biology. The fertilizer that is better than the blue crystals is the one you make yourself. It produces indefinitely. It fills the nutrient gap. It revitalizes the compost that feeds the soil. And it was buried under a mountain of hygiene culture so deep, you forgot it was the liquid gold of the ancients. Now you know. Now you can choose to revive what was lost. Now you can choose infinite nitrogen instead of annual expense. If you want to discover the other 7 lost methods of the self-sufficient homestead, techniques that turn waste into abundance and allow you to opt out of the grocery store system, I have compiled them into a complete guide. The link is in the description. Don't let this knowledge be flushed away with the previous generation. Subscribe to Natural Treasure and activate the bell, because the most valuable secrets are the ones hidden in plain sight.